Hello everyone, Master Zeon1001 here, and in this video I am proud to announce the release of Boxcutter 716 Catlin. This release has been several months in the making, and I'm finally glad to get this thing out of the door so we can finally put some of our most long-standing issues behind us. Of course, every update involves the creation of new issues, so I have no doubt that you'll be reporting a variety of interesting happenings to me as time goes on. But our goal is to, of course, continue strengthening and improving this product and making Boxcutter the best tool it can be. So without further ado, let's get into it. So one of the first bugs I wanted to ensure that we got rid of this release was users would select an object, but then deselect an object. But then they would tab into edit mode and launch Boxcutter and wonder why there would be an error. And that is because your object is deselected in object mode. So we have now fixed this bug, and now you can see that you can deselect an object mode, tab into edit mode. I don't know why on earth people are doing this. So many people are doing this, but now you are able to keep working with Boxcutter without issue. Previously, there was an issue with alignment and drawing objects, say, on the world, and having it transition and stay underworld. So now you can see that the moment you draw on world, you can immediately select the object and begin cutting. Of course, you have to select the object for this, but just notice that now you can interchangeably draw on the world, select the object, draw on the object. And we found this to be a little bit friendlier for beginners. The question we were asking ourselves is there a way we can make a gentle correction that helps people without making it so broad that it affects long-time users who are aware that you do indeed need to make a selection and be aware of your alignment options at the top of the screen. Of course, it goes without saying that we can turn on view alignment and just cut without any sort of issue. And that is one of the reasons that the top bar option for view was added as well. But the main thing was ensuring that when you had something selected, the particular type of drawing mode that you would want to be in is actually activated. In case you are just now finding out, when you draw on the surface, the shape is aligned to the surface as a 3D cutter. But if you draw starting off of the surface, or off of the selection in this case, which is the blue outline section here, you will get a result that is less than desired. But now you can see that with that in mind, I can quickly draw on top of a shape, but at the same time, I can also just draw and just cut out things using the power of view align. And this is one of the big things that Boxcutter 716 brings to the table. Our goal in Boxcutter is to help users of all skill levels find their way around the tools, and no better way than the in panel for help. As you can see, it now displays the name of the version. It also tells you how to begin using Boxcutter, very specifically how to use Boxcutter. And as you work, you'll see that the list actually increases in the amount of hotkeys, and it begins telling you about additional things at your disposal. In this case, I actually drew the shape, extruded it, and then pressed tab to pause it, which has now freed me up to move my hand around gesturally, which you cannot see. But we can now talk about these hotkeys. So the hotkeys are also displayed at the bottom of the screen, and we're hoping that this will make users more capable as far as finding their way around Boxcutter, because we definitely didn't mean to create such a labyrinth, but we do want to create a successful way for people to get to their destination. In fact, it's kind of interesting that as I rotate, I'm able to simplify the help a little bit, let go, it drops back into a more expanded state. Even see it talking about Control D, which is my favorite function of Boxcutter, the mini helper. But with that covers the new help in Boxcutter 716. So new to Boxcutter 716 is the ability to see penetrative shading. And what that means is that whenever you draw a shape, you already see it cut into the surface because it's 2.8, so it's live now. But if we look over here, you can also see that it's showing the amount that's being cut in through the penetrative shading x-rayed through the surface. This was something that was from 2.79, and now that it's back in 2.8, I can't live without it. However, if we do press H to switch over to wire shading, you can see that we do also have it, but to a limited degree. Wire shading is a mode specially designed to ensure that you're able to see through your shape, so it isn't as prominent, but penetrative shading is now back, so that's one more thing off the 2.79 list we can tick off. New in Boxcutter 716, when you tab into edit mode, you can press Alt W, which will bring up Boxcutter, and now you can actually use every single mode available in Boxcutter in edit mode. So that means you can cut, you can slice. In fact, I will go out of edit mode to deselect our new slice so I can tab back into edit mode, and we will do an inset. Inset gets a little jumpy before the extrusion. Little join, of course we will press E to extrude. Knife, classic, and then finally extract. Extract has actually never existed in edit mode till this moment, but I'm happy to announce that you are now able to extract in edit mode and replicate it in edit mode as well. You are also able to do it in object mode. In addition to that, there was a bug that was existing with MakeBox where if you drew a MakeBox, it would get misplaced. That has now been resolved. To show this bug comparatively in 2.83, if we tap into edit mode and we press Alt W, we can draw a box and press A to switch to make. And whenever we click, you can see that the box is actually misplaced. This isn't the worst case scenario of what can happen with MakeBox, but this is definitely unacceptable. Of course, as a customer and user, you would want to draw your box and get the box exactly where you placed it. So for that reason, I'm happy to announce in Boxcutter 716, we got in there and got that taken care of. In Boxcutter, in addition to being able to cut in edit mode, you are also able to draw a shape and shift to live in order to modify that shape in its own edit mode. And what this means is we can select this shape and just bevel certain edges, maybe grab these two, round them out. And then if we are done with this, we can actually click on Smart Apply, which will now smartly apply that cutter and remove it from the scene, as well as apply it to the target mesh. This is one of the larger improvements that came with 716 that I was quite excited about, because it means you can draw a cutter, pause it, modify it, and just smartly apply it. And then of course, if you're in object mode and you shift to live, and we go in edit mode and we modify this cutter, we can also use it just the same way. In fact, we can just draw a shape, shift to live, and also use the new Smart Apply in order to smartly apply that cutter to the mesh and allow us to continue working. At the top of Boxcutter, we have Circle, Box, and Ngon. New to Ngon in this release is a toggle that will jump between cyclic and non-cyclic. Non-cyclic means that Boxcutter will behave as normal, cutting manifold solid shapes. So you can see that every time I draw a point, it's always connected to its first point in order to ensure the shape is manifold. If we toggle that off, we can now draw in what's called cyclic mode. Previously, this was delegated to another hotkey. However, a system has been created around it and expanded. So you can see at this point, I'm able to draw thick lines and actually see these lines in action as I'm working. And this is quite a bit of a departure from Ngon and definitely has brought cyclic into its own self. However, this is one of my favorite ways to work because you can just draw, extrude, control for angle snapping, of course, press T in order to adjust the thickness. And even while adjusting the thickness, you can press 1 for sending out the thickness one direction, 2 for making go both in and out, and 3 for having it be on the opposite side. You can see in this example that pressing T doesn't actually adjust inset like you would expect with the 1, 2, 3 system. It actually adds compounding levels of thickness, and that is because there's a different system at play here. So over time, this will be improved, but in the meantime, I would just say you probably may not want to use the 1, 2, 3 behavior with cyclic at this moment. So I'm just showing it to you in this video so that way you're aware that this is a thing. So the ideal situation would be you would just go under Ngon, use it, and press T and spacebar to apply, or double left mouse click. And in the future, we will add the ability for you to be able to adjust the direction of your thickness and where you want to have that thickness come out as. But that is cyclic Ngon in a nutshell. In this example, I'm using the previous version of Boxcutter, 7.1v, and we will take our cube and just move it up a bit, and I'll press numpad period to focus in on it. I'll press numpad 5 for orthographic, and we will just start Boxcutter and just draw a cut. And you can see immediately that these cuts are just whiffing it. I mean, you know, fade is great and all until you're watching fade be a failure because your shapes aren't showing up. I mean, it's not fade's fault actually, but this kind of adds to it, right? Because it's like, this cut works. You can cut on the surface, but if you start cutting off the surface, it won't work because you're too far away from the grid floor. And this was due to a math oversight on our side that I'm glad to say has been resolved. Now in Boxcutter 7.1v, which we can see by hovering over the tooltip icon that shows for the active tool now, 716 Catlin, we could take this cube, move it up in the sky, and when we start cutting, things will just work. And this is the goal. This was actually solved several months ago. And the crazy thing about this bug is if you attempt it everywhere else, you will find it is such a widespread issue. It's such a difficult thing to do, to be able to work in 3D space at differing scales and distances, because, you know, Blender in a way is also working against you. And then like view alignment's one of those things that, you know, I'm kind of glad that it became a standard inside 2.8. There's so many random ideas that have kind of become standards for us in the way that we use Boxcutter. And view align has definitely been a way for us to just kind of work and troubleshoot and see just other ways we can work. Now, view align is able to be triggered by just drawing off of the mesh like you see here. However, you can also automatically always draw in view align by toggling the view align toggle. And by doing that, I can actually draw on the surface without having to worry about surface orientation adjusting things. Like for example, right here, normally this cut would be aligned along the side of a cube. That isn't the case whenever view align is on. So I'm happy to announce that view align has been improved dramatically for this particular release. And we are now able to cut cubes miles apart, light years away. And well, maybe not light years, don't test me on that. I mean, I don't know what a light year is. I was just telling you guys how I don't know anything about rulers, but I am happy to announce there has been some improvements made as far as cutting off of the origin when it comes to the new Boxcutter 716. In fact, if we look at this shape, you can see how the shading just kind of breaks down on it. And the oldest answer would have been to just press Q and use sharpen. However, now you are able to go under mesh tools and use auto smooth and just roll the wheel in order to get exactly the shading that you want. So this is actually a tool that's tempered based off of complaints, based off of users having issues with shading and struggling with shading things and understanding sharpening. We managed to figure out a way to make shading a little bit more interactive for users to be able to get the results that they want when it comes to just getting their model to look right so they can continue working even if their angles are a little bit more advanced. In the previous version of Boxcutter, a very common bug that users would run into is something called the repeat scale glitch. And it's not really a glitch, it's much more a type of behavior that's used to fill in a hole. For example, we can start box selecting because we didn't start Boxcutter. But if we start Boxcutter and we begin our cut, you can see that I'm able to make these cuts smaller. However, eventually at some point, we will trigger something related to something called laser cut and threshold. And this issue for the most part has been resolved. However, it does, right here, we actually hit our limit. So whatever scale this box is, rip. We try it again, rip. It just fails. We draw a little box and it goes through. Let's try it again. We want to draw a little box inside of this area. And whenever we click, we can see that this box is actually making the former box. So the thing is whenever a shape is too small, we assume that you may have made a mistake and wasn't trying to create doubles or Boolean issues. And so we replaced the shape with the previous shape. And so this choice is something that has continued to haunt us. And now we are proud to say that it has been resolved in the latest version of Boxcutter. So to show it one more time, I will draw this cut and we'll go a little bit smaller and we can see that it triggers repeat. And I'm not saying that the issue has been solved completely, but we have been taking some steps towards mitigating and easing the issue and its ability to come up. So it should actually be easier to use than ever. So we'll minimize this blender, bring up the next one, and we will just start off with classic box, not line box. And we'll click and drag. And we'll click and drag And we'll just keep making little boxes until we see the limit. And believe me, there's always a limit. But I think we're about to hit the limit that Blender has for working with booleans before we run into the limit that actually exists within Boxcutter itself. So I'm working on this scale guide that has a scale of all these different things, ranging from like my car to like my laptop to acorns to a squirrel, things I would know. Well, I don't know the size of a squirrel, but if you said, hey, I got attacked by a squirrel, I'd be like, our squirrel's kind of small. And in fact, it's getting hard to even align it in this area, but we're still able to go. And so with that, we will go down one more level. And it's hard to tell what's going on. Let's try that again. And the scale that we're working at is like microscopic. But this is something that we get complaints about. And I'm not sure what it's actually connected to or any of that, but it is definitely something we are concerned with. And I mean, I can't even get the view to be reasonable at this particular scale, but people want to cut at this scale. It's just a conundrum. It took so much work just to get that shape to line up, and then we triggered the repeat. However, we could always scroll back, look at this shape, scale it down, reorient it. I mean, not the best way, but if you're determined to make the smallest cut known to man, I mean, if you're trying to fix the screw of a mechanical rat's like little toe or so, I don't know what size scale that is. It's so insane. But yet this was an issue that we strove to improve, and so now you're able to cut smaller and smaller with the help of Boxcutter. In the previous version of Boxcutter, you could just start Boxcutter, draw a shape, and press V in order to array. If you couldn't see your array, you could press Shift R, which would reset it and allow you to set it back where you want. And then the mouse movement would occur. And everything's fine and so good here. We can also press B and bevel it, and we can see that the mouse movement is relatively natural. It's the way things should feel for doing such an operation. So if we pull back into view and we just draw the biggest box you've ever seen the side of the Pecos River, and we press B, you can see that bevel is actually functioning quite well. However, whenever you press V, you can see that the amount that's being moved is just astronomically small, and that to me is unacceptable. We've always talked about something called a one-to-one array because we don't have the ability to do mouse wrap due to technical issues, but someday we will be able to deal with that, I guess. But in the meantime, we could at least improve the array to prevent it from being so limited, because how would you actually solve such an array? You could go into Control D, but it appears that the array distance was never added, even though it's one of my biggest requests is that we need to be able to adjust the distance of the array. But I'm proud to announce that we did the next best thing. So we'll minimize old Blender, bring up new Blender, and we'll do that same maneuver again. We draw our box, left mouse plus right mouse to pause or press tab, and we can press B to bevel, and we're beveling like no one's business, same as before. But the real magic is whenever you do something like array and you're able to launch this thing. Launch it as far as you need to, and it's one-to-one as close as possible to the scale of the movements that you're doing related to the scale of the object. Some sort of formula going on there, but it's definitely an improvement compared to the previous iteration. So this is actually the way that we want arraying to be done, and we also want to be able to hold shift to be able to set things real fine and then move it across the origin to jump to the other side. But the fine movement of it was also critical. I also see that at some point we will need to go back and revisit the ability to make it resume from a zoomed in state. So these are all different levels of bugs that we have fought with internally, but I just want y'all to know that steps have been taken towards making array feel better at larger scales, since this was something that users were complaining about. Or not complaining, they were pointing out as an issue that was needing to be improved. In Boxcutter, whenever you draw a cut, you'll normally see it as a solid shape. You're also able to press H to show it as a wire, and you can also go under Display and actually choose to show it as a wire only whenever you draw shapes, and this can help you see through. Sometimes during your cut, you also want to be aware of what kind of geometry is there. So I made this cut, but you have no idea what type of geometry exists unless I were to press Alt V and show wireframe using hard ops, or to draw a shape and press Z in order to show the wireframe during the draw. Sometimes it's good to see what's going on with the wireframe during the draw so you can better understand what kind of solutions Blender's giving you for your booleans, and that can help you troubleshoot. And for that reason, in addition to show wire being a toggle you can have on for all shapes, it is something that will turn on automatically for knife as well. So here you see me using it with just show wire on, where it just shows it every cut. However, if we were to turn off show wire and we were to just do a cut and press K for knife, this would also normally show the wire. I'm assuming that there's more than likely an issue. That's the reason that it did not turn on the wire in the transitionals phase, so I'll be checking into that post this video. However, if you start off with knife, you can see that knife will now show the wire in the mesh, which is hard to read while you're working. But if we look at this, you can see that because of this geometry being placed, we were able to optimize our solution. So another example of showing this in action would be to do a cut here, do a cut here. In fact, if we cut on a line, you can see that no additional geometry is added for the solution. But if we put a piece here, you can see that it actually solved using the most unoptimal solution. And what I mean for that is if we were to promote this to be a bevel modified object, you can see that this is receiving a degree of skewing. You don't ask me why bevels look like this now. I find it to be pleasant. I think it looks like CAD, and I love it. I want more of them CAD boys coming over to B3D. But looking at this with the bevel, it's almost able to be lived with, except that I see that this bevel is so skewed, strangely. It's like a strange skewing. And so the easiest way to change that would be to just jump in a knife, do a quick cut, and now the bevel is actually behaving exactly as it's supposed to. And so whenever I'm modeling, I generally have rules for keeping a boundary loop present in order to ensure that, or not a boundary loop, a guidance loop, in order to prevent any sort of skewing issues that can come from the bevel and having whatever geometry occur. For example, we can do a cut just like so, and on the surface things actually look good. It looks like something you could live with. But if we turn on wireframe, which wireframe is just so weird now, if we turn on classic wireframe, we can see that this would actually be problematic. In fact, finding wireframe display in Blender is problematic. So if you know how to get to this stuff quickly, then you probably don't need hops. But for me, every time I have to get to this stuff, it's a little bit more of a struggle. But you can see that this is struggling with this particular area. And just by changing that to a knife box and just drawing a box, you don't even have to extrude it. You could just laser cut. We'll fit it to the box and make sure you don't have interior faces if you laser cut. And we can see that the result is actually more optimized for our liking. So that in general is wire in a nutshell, and also knife and its usefulness with wire. When using Boxcutter, you can left click and drag to begin a cut, and then after releasing left mouse and moving your mouse, you can begin to extrude. Anytime during the cut, you can press X in order to transition a shape into a slice. New to this version, you can also press X to transition into an inset, while also pressing T to adjust the thickness. In the event that you want to change it back to cut, you can press X again and toggle it back to slice and toggle back to inset, all using X. In the event you want to change it to a knife, you can press Control X, and that will actually change your cut into a knife cut. So anytime that you're working, you can quickly jump to knife on the left side of your keyboard without having to deal with the I and O keys, or the I and K keys, which were formerly knife and inset. Those keys still remain as knife and inset. We just wanted to make it easier for people who are using one hand on the mouse, one hand on the keyboard to get to certain functions. Here we are in the previous version of Boxcutter 7.1v. We'll go ahead and start Boxcutter, and I will Shift A to create a plane. And with this plane, we can just begin drawing our cuts. You can see that working off of a plane isn't terribly problematic, as it shouldn't be, because after all, it is a plane. It should be easy to cut all the way through a plane. It's just a wet napkin to us. However, if we were to press Q and go through the modifier scroll, you can see that the size of these cutters is just a bit out of control. And we could have left this and just said that this solution suffices. However, in my opinion, this solution does not suffice. I feel personally compelled to ensure that this is resolved, and I'm fortunate enough that Proxy was able to fine-tune the algorithms for cut fitting in order to ensure that this isn't a situation going forward. So we'll minimize and jump over to Blender 2.83, where I have Boxcutter 716 installed. In case you ever wonder what's installed, you can just hover over your active tool button, and we will just draw some cuts. And all these cuts that you're seeing are actually on surface. Whenever you start off the surface, you can see the View Align button highlight. Really, there's no difference when it comes to a 2D state, but when it comes to 3D, sometimes you actually want to cut in accordance with your view, and sometimes you want to specifically cut in accordance with your surface. So it's always a difficult question as far as whether you want to cut with your surface or cut in alignment with your geometry. But after placing a few cuts, we can now press Q and actually scroll through our mod scroll and actually see what we're getting here. And this is actually a more optimal result. So this alone would not suffice as 2D cutter. So to continue on, we'll press D and jump to custom cutter, and I'll press C, and we'll select the main cube and press SX2 in order to scale it. And one thing I like to do is look at these things from the front and then press numpad 8 a couple of times in order to get this 45-degree angled view. And from here, we're able to draw a custom cutter that is exactly the 2D custom cutter, because we now support 2D cutters in custom cutter, which is what 2D custom cutter is all about. And with this, you're able to get some really unique results just experimenting around. I plan to show a little bit more in depth as far as what we have been doing with this, but this is one of the features that I was most excited for with custom cutter. I mean, of course, you can always have a library of 3D cutters you can pick from to create your shapes. But 2D is something that speaks a little bit more to me when it comes to a cutter for some reason, because you can just take a simple plane, bevel a corner, and just press D and switch to custom cutter, press C to make it the custom cutter, and immediately just use that as your cutter. Of course, I held shift to constrain it to some square constraints, but that's all that there is to it. And so it goes even further than that. If we were to duplicate this shape and just use this shape as its own cutter, well, we're using this shape to cut this shape, so it's not going to modify on the fly. But you can see that I'm able to just modify this shape to get a more interesting result, and then replicate that almost immediately by marking it as the custom cutter and using it on the mesh. So this is one of the features I was most excited about, and so I'm glad to be able to present this to you here today. Starting out in the previous version of Blender, which has the Boxcutter 7.1V already installed, we are able to press spacebar and just add a rigid body. And that's how you add rigid bodies now to an object or a series of objects in Blender, in my opinion. If you want to cut it from here, that's when things get a little more problematic. A cut will work, but the moment you slice, things will not work out. And this was something that I found to be particularly egregious and have wanted to fix for quite a while. In fact, I wanted to have not only this fixed, but I wanted to have a feature added called Physics Cutter, which would basically add physics to the object that you slice, like a physics slice. So you would just slice things up and it would just automatically put the physics on it at the end, as a way for us to just kind of make up for Blender removing the whole rigid body quick adding workflow from Blender. But if we minimize this, we can come over to the other Blender where we can do the same thing. We can press spacebar, and I'm just going to search for rigid, and we can type in add rigid bodies, and this object will free fall. If I press Control spacebar, it will just fall, and we'll just take the timeline back to the beginning. But if we go in our options and make sure that parent shape is off, things will be a little bit less problematic. The next thing is to actually draw and begin slicing, and you can see that even with rigid bodies on this object, those errors are quiet as a mouse, and I cannot be happier about this. This was something that stopped me from being able to make more Boxcutter ads. I mean, I'm not saying I have problems making Boxcutter ads, but once this was done, it unlocked a plethora of new possibilities for Boxcutter and what we're able to do with it. So after making a couple of slices, you would think that from here you're able to press Control Spacebar and it will work, but things will just explode due to reasons. So we'll press A, select all, and press Control A, and we will turn Visual Geometry to Mesh. So if we press Control Shift 8 or Shift Spacebar, sorry, thinking in terms of 7/9 there, if we press Shift Spacebar, you can see that the pieces explode a little bit more naturally, and that's because we had to apply the modifiers for the evaluation to go through correctly. But if we turn off gravity, you can also see that whenever we play, the pieces just fly away. And that is one of the biggest things I wanted to see in the hands of users of the latest Boxcutter. And I'm so happy to announce that this has now been resolved so users can cut rigid bodies without bugs.